Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim York, and I work with the KDE Munis support team. I hope everyone had a great holiday weekend and you've come back refreshed and ready to start thinking about all things PSD and CSD. I always say happy PSD CSD season because it is a big season reporting for our Kentucky school districts. It's one that I look forward to helping the districts with. So let's get started. First, I want to introduce you to the other members of our team. We have Kristen Lambert, who is our team lead, and she's also helping produce in the background today. And we have Kathy Pelletier, who is our Tyler Technologies vendor partner. So let's get started with all things PSD and CSD reporting for 2022. And we'll begin with the Epsb Id import program. And this import is you'll use an Infinite Campus, and it builds a file containing teacher EPSB license numbers for upload to Munis. It matches the import file to the last 4 digits of the employee's social security number and their date of birth, and it imports the associated EPSB ID into the state ID field on the employee master. So you're going to start in Infinite Campus, and Kristen and I do not work with that part of the program, but that's where you'll actually be starting with this process. And I kind of like to use graphics to kind of give you an idea of how things flow through this process. And here you're going to start with Infinite Campus with a validation report. And from that validation report, you make corrections. Then you actually pull the EPSB ID report and you save that to your computer. Then going into Munis, you're going to upload the EPSB ID file to the Epsb program. You're going to check that report for errors. You're going to make manual corrections and then run your Psd report and watch for error 50. And we're going to talk about each of these steps as we go along. So first things first, the validation report. This report, as I mentioned, is pulled from Infinite Campus. And this shows you the pathway in Infinite Campus to get to that report. And in the campus toolbar, you'll choose either a single school or all schools for the report. And then you'll choose the report type. To validate the data, you're going to choose the validation report. And then to create the file needed to upload to Munis, you'll choose the Munis upload file. So you'll have one of each of those options. And something that I find sometimes districts will get the validation report and the upload file confused, and they try to upload the validation report, and that will not work. So if you're ever having issues trying to upload that report, make sure you're choosing the upload file and not the validation report. So for the validation report, it will report actively employed staff. And in red here, we have including those with no EPSB ID license number. So it's going to pull all of your active staff. But in the final column of that report, you're going to see whether or not that member will be included in that upload file. And you can sort that to yes, they'll be included, or no, they will not be included. Other information you're going to see in that file would be your members' names, their birth date, last 4 of their social security number, and their EPSB license numbers. And the one thing that you'll notice on the validation report when you pull it, if there's any information missing, it's always highlighted in yellow. So if you decide to sort your export file by yes, they're going to be included, and no, take a close look at those that are marked no to make sure they're not reporting because there's not an EPSB ID number there. You can make all of these corrections in that validation file to get it as accurate as possible before you actually pull the EPSB ID import, and we'll talk a little more about that too. So as we said, corrections to staff records must be made in Infinite Campus before the EPSB upload file is created. So you take that validation report, you make as many of the corrections as you can before you actually pull that file, and that's going to give you the most accurate information that you can receive. And if you have any questions at all about the validation report, because that's from Infinite Campus and not something that our team works with, you'll want to reach out to Crystal Darnell, who is in the Division of School Data Services, and you see her email address listed. So, excuse me. So this is what the import file looks like that you're going to be pulling to use in Munis. And as you can see, it's in Excel format. And this is just your path to that import. And these are the steps that you're going to choose to import that file. You'll simply choose to find, you'll browse for where you saved that file on your computer. You'll click OK and accept and choose to import it. You'll need to choose an output and then click OK. And again, you want to look over that report for errors before you commit to the upload. And Epsb numbers will import into the state ID field of the employee master. So where you're going to see that imported first is in employee master in that state ID field. So Epsb ID appears in the Epsb ID field when you're looking at the actual PSD CSD files. So as you can see here, there is actually a field called Epsb ID in both PSD and CSD. So once you fully import, that's where you're going to see those. After you've generated your PSD and CSD reports, that's where you'll see the Epsb ID numbers. So errors that you might see are one of two at this point in the process. The import file does not match an existing employee in Munis, or that the duplicate last four of Social Security number and date of birth, they don't match. So here are the two errors that you'll see. Import file does not match an existing employee in Munis. Possible explanations that we have for that: the last four digits of the Social Security number does not match an employee in Munis, so it could be wrong in either Infinite Campus or Munis, and you'll want to make the correction wherever that needs to be. Their date of birth does not match an employee in Munis. Again, you'll want to look at Infinite Campus and Munis to see if it's different in one or the other and make the correction where you need to. And an employee may not exist in Munis. So here's an area where you may have technology teachers that must exist in Infinite Campus because they have to have their schedules listed, but they're not actual employees in Munis. So that's something to watch out for. Then you have duplicate last four of Social Security number and date of birth. Possible explanations: more than one employee exists in Munis with the same last four digits of Social Security number and date of birth. And again, that would be extremely rare. But you would just need to manually update that information if that's the case. And an employee in Munis has more than one master file. And we see this a lot if you have an employee who has both an employee master and a terminated employee master file, you'll get that error. So how do you read these error reports? Because you're not really having that Munis information there when you get these error reports. And as you can see, we have two. You have your import proof at the top, and you have your bottom, which is your import. And what you'll want to do is first, you could either check the information against the validation report, go back to Infinite Campus, look at the validation report, match this up to find out who that is, or you could match the record number on the Epsb ID import proof, which is the top report, and match it up with the record line on the import file. So if you notice, the red arrow is on number 4 on the Epsb ID import proof, and it's on number 4 on the file. And that 3333 represents the last four of the Social Security number. So you would be able to go back into Munis and put those last four digits into Munis and see who you pull up that matches the birth date, etc., to find out who you need to make those corrections for. So then you'll want to enter the missing Epsb ID numbers. So once you've generated the PSD records, you'll check for missing Epsb ID numbers on the PSD records. And you'll do that by choosing search, enter less than 0 in the Epsb ID field and click accept. And any that you're missing, you'll want to go back and add those numbers in. So at this point, the error that you would receive is error 50, which is no Epsb ID number, and it is required for Psd reporting. So each employee on the Psd report is required to have an Epsb number. You will need to obtain that number and add it to the employee master manually. And you can utilize the validation report for this as well. And today we have Crystal Horde with us from the Division of Educator Preparation and Certification, who's going to speak to how you can locate those Epsb ID numbers should you need to incorporate them. Crystal, you're up.
Thank you, Kimberly. So everyone who has a certification record, even if they've only been working as an emergency sub, for instance, anybody who has a certification record is going to have an Epsb ID number. That number is generated automatically when an Epsb account is created. So the first step, what I always tell people, especially like if HR is hiring a new employee, send them to the new KEX website, which is our new login screen for the certification system that launched May 2nd. Send them to this website and go to the create, or well, there's a option here for register account if they haven't created an account yet. But if they have already had an account, or if you need to go in to check one of your employees' Epsb ID numbers, log in with your credentials. Next slide. When you log in to your own account, and this is the view that you would typically see for somebody who does not have other permissions, you'll land on the dashboard page. But if you click on the second tab over, which is the profile, this is where you will see the personal information for yourself or for one of your staff. You can view the profile information for the people that you're in your district as well. The Epsb ID number will be in parentheses. As you can see, I have redacted this one, but under the where the little light blue box where the name is, there to the right of the name in parentheses is the Epsb ID number, but it's also under the personal information in the section where I've highlighted in yellow there. Next slide. If you are the HR person, the HR director in your district, and many times you all wear numerous hats and are doing multiple things. So if you're also designated as the HR director for the district and can do staffing, adding and removing staff in your district, you can run the district role report. You can get to this by clicking on the reports tab at the top of the page, and these images are going to go clockwise here. Click on reports tab first at the top. This will give you a drop down under that little report drop down, and you'll want to select district role report. And then finally, you'll want to click on the generate report after you've selected district role report. Next slide. When you pull up your district role report, you're going to see a record, and it's going to be more than 2, obviously, but you're going to see a record for all of your staff who are currently staffed in your district. When we transitioned from the old Epsb system, the legacy system as we refer to it, to the new KEX system, there were a lot of staff that came over into the new system showing active, that had active roles. We heard from numerous districts that these people have been retired for 5 years, 10 years. There was a lot of staff that came over. In many cases, this is because they weren't properly end dated, or maybe there was no end date input in the old system. It was only their status was changed from active to inactive. Long story short, you're going to need to clean up your district role report prior to the start of lead. So if this, we've got still some time available on this, but this will be one of the places that you'll want to go and take a look at this district role report. Over to the right-hand side of the screen where I've circled and put the big red arrow, that is your little download button. So when you run this district role report and you've ensured that all of your staff that are showing on this report are the people who are actively working in your district, certified staff, download this report. You'll get a pop-up asking you which file type. I always recommend to download that to a CSV file. Next slide. And then on this page, this district role report, column A of this report, you'll have to expand the columns out, but column A is going to show that individual's Epsb ID number. So if you've got, 250 staff in your district, you should have a report with 250 records, and their Epsb ID numbers are going to be on the left-hand side. This report is going to, or can be used as a tool for you to validate or input missing Epsb ID numbers that you're missing in Infinite Campus. This is the guidance that I'm giving to district league coordinators right now that have contacted me about when's league going to start and what's the next steps. Just FYI, if you all are also the person that's doing lead, it's going to be a much simpler process for this year in the new system, but every certified individual in your district does need to have a valid Epsb Id number in Infinite Campus. And this is where you can get that report to validate or input the missing Epsb Id numbers. Next slide. So below is, or on this screen, there's my contact information by email. Keep in mind, I will get back to you as soon as I can. We are on a time crunch right now. We've got about 7 days until the rank change deadline. So if I can't get back to you the same day, I will get back to you within a day or two. But Kimberly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this, and I'll hang on for a while and see if there's any questions specific to the Epsb Id number. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. So as Crystal mentioned, she's going to hang around with us a little bit to see if you have any questions. And something I meant to mention earlier was that please use the Q&A button at the top of the screen if you have any questions you want to ask during this webcast. Kristen will be watching for that. We will also have 3 areas where we stop through this presentation to answer any questions that you may have. So feel free to use the Q&A, or you're welcome to wait till we stop in those sections. Sometimes we are a little bit behind. We lag, maybe 20 to 30 seconds. So if your question comes up, we've moved on, we'll get it the next time, but we will try to watch for those questions through the webcast. So an FAQ here regarding Epsb Id. Why is this process necessary? The PSD and CSD files now include those Epsb license numbers. This allows KDE to minimize the use of staff social security numbers, and they are only required on PSD files. You may see them on CSD files, that's perfectly fine, but they're only required on the PSD files. And a question was, our district did not enter Epsb Id numbers for our staff, but many of them have one already. How were they entered? So for several years, KDE has imported those staff Epsb numbers into Infinite Campus. Staff were matched as carefully as possible, and those numbers loaded for those where a match was found. Some staff may have a certification in teaching, and others may have Epsb numbers for other reasons. Are Epsb numbers required for classified staff? And as we said, no, classified staff are not required to have them. Only the PSD files. And as Crystal mentioned, there should be no reason now not to have an Epsb Id number for individuals on the PSD files. You have access to those, and they're going to be required for lead. So it's good to go ahead and get that updated as quickly as possible. And these are things that you can start working on now. We're going to discuss the reporting period for PSD CSD being September 15th through October 1st. But there's so many of these things that you can already go ahead and do and be ready for it when September 15th rolls around. So we'll stop here to see if there are any questions about the Epsb Id import process. And we'll have questions again later on. And of course, if you're uncomfortable or don't want to ask a question on the webcast, you can always email them to our box at munis@education.ky.gov. Kristen, do we have anything out there now?
No questions, except earlier I did have someone respond and ask where they could get the slide deck, and I sent out via the KDE Munis support desk email box a reminder about the webcast today, and in it included a link to the slides, which I see a lot of people have accessed. It's on a SharePoint site that I manage, and we upload documents to there. If you did not receive this notice, this reminder, maybe someone forwarded you the email about the webcast, you too can be included on the All-State Munis Finance Contacts list. We don't send a lot of information out. Sometimes of the year there will be more information than others, but for sure we can add you to that list. Just send an email to that munis@education.ky.gov email address that Kim has up on the screen, and we'll make sure to add you to that distribution list. That's it, Kim.
Okay, let's move on. So we're going to talk about CSD and PSD reporting, as I mentioned, and we're going to start out with CSD reporting. And this is a report that produces an electronic file of classified employee information. It's required to be submitted no later than October 1st, and it's produced using data from Employee Master, Employee Job Salary, and Job Class Master records. So how is a person, what is the criteria for an employee to generate into the CSD report? First, their summary class codes must fall between 7,000 and 7,999. Their group BU must contain CLAS or RCLA, and hired as of September 15th of the fiscal year. Allocation codes. We're going to start out with allocation codes, and FTE are the areas where people seem to have the most issues or problems. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit today. So if you have an employee who performs a single job but at several locations, they are going to have multiple CSD records due to the allocation code set up on the job salary record. An example here is that we have an instructional assistant who works equally at 4 elementary schools. There will be 4 CSD records for the base pay with an FTE of 1 on each record and an allocation of 25. If the contract is for 186 days, the contract days reported on each CSD record will be 46.5 days. The base pay records for a single job class code will always equal 100 for the allocation, and the days will add up to the standard contract. But the FTE percent is to be 1 for all the records because they're doing one job. I'm going to show you a graphic with this too, but they're doing one job, but they're just doing it at 4 different locations. So of course the GL string, those things are going to be different. The annual salary, the reference salary, and the days are prorated by the allocation, which is that 25. So let me show you a graphic to give you an idea of how this breaks down. And I know that this is an extremely large presentation, but hopefully this is going to be a good tool for you to use through this process to be able to look at graphics and things like this to better think these things through. So here we have Betsy, who is an instructional assistant. She has 1 job class code, and that's the important thing to remember. She's doing 1 job class code. She has 186 contract days, but she is divided between 4 schools. So her allocation is going to be what we're looking at now. That's what's going to be divided out. So Betsy has a 1 CSD record with 25 for 1 school, and the same for all 4 locations. And what you're seeing here, though, the FTE remains 1 on each one of these because it's only 1 full-time position, but her allocation and her days are divided out and prorated based on that allocation of 25%. And hopefully that helps make it a little more clear. So the FTE, an employee who performs multiple jobs will have multiple pay records with a full-time equivalent of less than 1 on each record. So here we're looking at someone who is doing 2 different jobs. So their FTE is going to have to divide out based on the percentage that they do each of these jobs. An employee is an instructional assistant half-time and a supply service aide half-time. Each position or job class code will have an FTE of 0.50 because they're doing 1 job half-time and the other half-time. If the same employee was an instructional assistant at 2 different schools, so we're adding in another element, the instructional assistant position would have an FTE of 0.50 and have an allocation of 50 for each location. So here's a graphic to start breaking this down. So we have Bradley here. He has 2 job class codes and at 1 location. So Bradley is an instructional assistant. The CSD record is going to show 0.50 on the instructional assistant and 0.50 as a supply service aide, which together equals 1 FTE, full-time equivalent. So here we've added that one of these jobs he does at 2 different locations. So this is going to affect FTE, but it's also going to affect allocation. So as we can see, Bradley is the instructional assistant at 2 different locations. So his allocation is going to break down to 50 at John Doe Elementary and Mary Doe Elementary. His FTE is going to remain the same as 0.50 with each one of the positions that he serves for a total of 1 FTE. So let's talk about hybrid employees. You're going to see a note at the end of the report that will say, check the setup of hybrid employees. And this is to remind you to verify employees who are serving in a classified position but paying into TRS are included on the CSD report. And some of the people you see here are your Frisky directors, your CCLC directors, finance officers, and your school nurse. And the note here, and this is important, only employees who serve in a position requiring a teaching certificate with an Epsb Id number will be reported on the PSD file. Hybrid employees must be set up in the employee master and employee job salary with a group BU of CLAS and summary class codes in the 7,000 range. So remember that just because you have a classified employee who could be paying into TRS, that doesn't make them, you know, a PSD employee. It keeps them on the CSD report. What matters is, are they required or not required to have that Epsb Id number for their particular job? So this is simply your path to generating the CSD records and the screen that you will see when you do. And you can manually update those CSD records. So some errors can be resolved by updating the employee record on the CSD screen. You simply select search, enter that desired criteria to locate the employee and hit accept. Select update to make any changes and accept to save the changes. But the note here is that districts are strongly encouraged to make all necessary changes in the employee master or employee job salary. If changes are not made on those records, the same problems will exist when future CSD records are generated. So if it is something that you can actually go back to the employee master or the job salary screen and correct, do it, especially if you have to regenerate the CSD records, because you want to make sure that if you regenerate that you're pulling in accurate information. So manually adding CSD records. So some information can be added directly to the CSD records. However, it will only be accurate for the current reporting process. And the employee must exist in Employee Master before a CSD record can be added. And you're basically following the same steps. Select Add, enter the appropriate information in the CSD screen, and select Accept. And again, we highly recommend you add this information to the Employee Master or Employee Job Salary records whenever it's possible to avoid the same error in the future. So creating the electronic file. Once the CSD records are reviewed and edited, a file must be created for KDE. You're going to do a find on all records and then select the electronic file button. A CSD file will automatically be created, and as you see at the bottom of the screen, the file name appears at the bottom. Make note of that file name so it can be easily found when you get to the submission process. So submitting the electronic file to KDE. The CSD file must be submitted to KDE by October 1st. It is submitted through the Seek Data Web Submission application, which we will cover momentarily. And submitting a replacement file. Only one CSD file is accepted by KDE. Please send an email to finance.reports@education.ky.gov. And that S on reports is something people tend to miss. Be sure that it's finance.reports with an S at education.ky.gov. If there's a reason to submit the file again, they will have to deny the original file before you can actually submit a second file. And so this is just a grid. We're going to talk about these individually of the most common CSD report errors that we typically see with the district. This is just kind of good to pull these slides off and kind of keep them handy. Of course, the guide is a good thing to pull off and keep handy. It has the error report codes listed and what you can do to correct them. But these are just the most common, and we're going to talk about these individually a little bit. So CSD error 6.50, we see this a lot. It's an invalid object code on the CSD record. And the problem here is that the object code on a CLAS group BU, summary class in the 7,000 range, does not contain the appropriate GL object code. Valid object codes for CSD reporting are 0130, 31, and 60. Invalid object codes will create a CSD error. The correction here, you want to go to the employee master record and/or job salary record with the appropriate object code. And the little grid here that you can see, the classified summary class code 7,000 to 7,999. You'll want to use job class codes in the 8,000 to 899 range only, and it's showing you those object codes that you can use, 30, 31, and 60. And licensed nurses, the note here should be coded to object code 0160. So CSD Error 11, no race selected. The problem here is that no race selections have been made on the employee master record. If no, not Hispanic or Latino is selected in the ethnicity field, a race must be selected. That's what we see a lot. We have the no, not Hispanic marked, but then nothing chosen in the race. Under race, you may not choose 2 or more races, and that is something that was determined by the Division of District Support. Again, that finance.reports@education.ky.gov is the email address to, if you have any questions about not being able to choose 2 or more races, but you will get an error if you choose that. And if yes, Hispanic is chosen, nothing should be marked under race. So that's another thing that can cause an error message. So CSD Error 16, invalid summary class code. The problem here, a summary class code outside the list of valid KDE codes exists on a pay record. The correction, you want to update the job class master with a valid summary class code. And again, you have this grid here that you can follow to kind of see which code you should use. So CSD Error 1610, no summary class code defined. The problem here, job class code associated with the employee's pay doesn't contain a summary class code. The correction, you'll update job class master record with a valid summary class code. And again, if you need any detailed classification codes, you have the link to those found in the presentation, and also a link for our KDE Munis support guides. CSD Error 26, which is an invalid BU, job class, and object code. So it's these three things combined. The problem here is the error will generate when an employee has an invalid combination of group BU, job class code, and or object code. The correction, you're going to go back into Employee Master job salary records to reflect the appropriate combination. And you can see the valid combinations here listed. So CSD Error Code 35. And this is the one that always gets us. It's this calculation that you have to make: hours times the contract days times the rate of pay minus the annual salary is outside of KDE parameters, which it gives you a plus or minus of $25. The correction here is to update the job salary record to reflect the appropriate information. So we just basically, and I'm always happy to help you with this, is you just want to look at those hours and the contract days and make sure that that calculation comes out to within plus or minus $25 to the in the annual salary field. So the most common CSD report warning. So this is simply a warning on the report. You can submit with a warning. It just wants you to take a look at it and make sure that it's correct. And in this event, we have error warning 124, which is finance officer not reported for the district. So that means you need someone in there with a summary class code of 7166, 7184, 85, or 86. And it's possible that this person will be reporting on the PSD. So again, you're just looking to see, is this correct? Have we got our finance officer listed? If they should be on the CSD report. And if not, you can disregard it if they're going to be reporting on the PSD report. So we can actually stop here for a minute to see if we have any questions on CSD reporting. Again, I'm giving it just a couple of seconds because I know we have the delay. You can also send questions later to munis@education.ky.gov, but I'll check in with Kristen. Kristen, do we have any questions on CSD reporting?
We do, but it really is more pertains to that district role report, and Crystal answered those questions. I'm not sure, Crystal, if you kind of want to review the question and answer for everybody else.
I got a couple anonymous questions that I just replied directly back to the person. The first question was, what if a person has multiple records in the district role manager? How do we fix that? And my response was that it is fine if the person is actually serving in multiple roles within the district. If some of those roles are no longer active for that person, simply click on the red trash can button, which is the delete button in the district role report to, it's before you generate the district role report, it's on the actual KEX screen, to remove the role or roles that they're no longer serving in. I come across this often. Sometimes people that have kind of made their way to central office will still be listed as teacher or school educator or principal or any of the various roles that they've previously held within that district or other districts. If it's a role in your own district and that person is no longer serving in that role, you can go in there and you can delete it. If you are a person who is authorized to do staff management. Staff management in KEX is limited to the roles of HR director, superintendent designee, and superintendent. So you have to have one of those assigned roles in the new KEX system to be able to access staff management and add and receive roles. The second question, or the follow-up question to that I received was, can you run the district role report multiple times? And my response on that one is absolutely. Run it until the district role report is accurate. If needed, when you export the Excel CSV file, you can sort it by school and even save it and send it out to your principals so they can take a second look at it to make sure all of their certified staff is present and accounted for on that list. They can give you feedback, oh, this person's gone, or we've hired somebody in this person's place, that you can then add or remove staff based on the principal's feedback.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for
Sure.
especially for being on the webcast today. It's great having other people other than just me and Kim.
I agree.
We did have a question about, can you run the CSD and PSD multiple times? Run it, fix it, run it again. And when you run it, it overwrites everything, correct, Kim? So
if they have made the corrections, and that's why we stress making the corrections in employee job salary, or employee master, if that's where those corrections need to be, then when you regenerate, it will pull it correctly. But sometimes people make the corrections just in the CSD file, and if you regenerate, you'll wipe out anything that you've manually updated in just the CSD file itself. So yes, you can regenerate as many times as you want, and I recommend that because you can start this process now. You can run these reports, you can see where you have error messages, and I'm happy to help you correct those messages, those errors now. We can get some things knocked out before September 15th rolls around. But just remember, if you make the corrections in only the CSD files or PSD files and you regenerate, you wipe that out. So.
And I'm hoping if you fix it now in the job salary records or wherever it needs to be fixed, hopefully it's fixed then going forward for future years too.
Absolutely.
So we had one question that I know I can answer. Says the new finance letter says alternative IDs are now required for all staff. What would we use for classified staff? And that is really going to be a behind the scenes on the electronic file that you all have nothing to worry about. What will be provided in the CSD file, as well as actually the PSD file, will be an alternate ID, and it's a combination of the district number from system settings in Munis, as well as the employee number in Munis. It just provides another way to identify employees without using their social security number. So nothing for you to worry on your end there. Let's see, we have a question here about licensed nurses, and I'm not sure if we can answer that in this webcast. It says LPN or RN. Did you say they need to be 0160? Thanks.
Just if you have a school nurse, I think my understanding is the object code is typically 0160. Anything further than that, I wouldn't be able to answer. I just know that if you have a district and you have someone 0160, they'll report.
I may be able to provide a little bit of guidance on this.
Crystal, that's awesome.
Awesome. We're going to have you next year too.
I'll set my calendar. So a couple years ago, the school nurse regulation was expired. We are seeing less and less, the regulation that governs EPSB certification for school nurse was expired, because we're seeing less and less, and it was kind of a trend we were seeing over the last 10 years, less and less certified school nurses. Part of that was also because Western, more than 10 years ago, Western Kentucky University used to be the only university that had a school nurse certification program that someone who was was a licensed nurse could then go through Western's program to complete certification requirements for the EPSB issued certificate. Well, that trend has been going down. I think we had like less than 42 certified school nurses. So under the 2017, I think Bevan initiative, where regs have to be revisited and either expired, continued, or changed, we allowed that regulation, the school nurse certification regulation, to expire. That being said, if a school district hires a school nurse and they're new and they do not have an EPSB issued certificate, they will be hired as a classified employee. The only ones that would still be a certified employee are the ones who were already in the system as a school nurse before that regulation expired. So if that changes your guidance to the districts as far as whether to report them on PSD or CSD, that was my tidbit that I wanted to provide. We no longer issue new school nurse certifications because that regulation was allowed to expire. However, if they're already in the system with an EPSB issued school nurse certificate, they can continue to renew that.
I did have one thing. Oh, thank you, Crystal. Were you done?
Sure.
No, I was just thinking of the earlier question about the alternate ID. There was an update to Munis that was released. Geez, it's been a month or so ago. So I would imagine most people would have a somewhat up-to-date Munis system by the time they run the PSD CSD. It would be few and far between that anyone would have a issue there. But sorry, I just had to throw that out there that was an update. I believe it was released like in maybe June or July. So most people's systems are up to date and you shouldn't have to worry about it. Kim, the next question is, why do we get a whole new list of errors after we upload the report?
Okay.
So I'm guessing after, are you talking about uploading possibly the Psd CSD report to the DDS website? They may have created a whole new set of errors whenever you made your fixes, would be my guess.
Yeah, the SEEK submission system has its own set of things that it looks for outside of, we can help you with all these corrections in Munis to get your Munis report the way that it should be. But there are other issues that can come up when you actually submit that to the SEEK submission site. And that's when we pull Karen Conway in. I've learned a lot of things that that you can get error messages for in SEEK and have been able to help a little bit, but we pretty much turn over the SEEK submission errors to Karen Conway and the Division of District Support. But yeah, there are other things that it looks for there that are outside of our realm. So that's about the only thing I could say. And it would be case by case. We just have to look at them when you get the SEEK submission errors. And I usually, Karen and I work really well together on this. So we will help you the best we can. But yes, you can get two different sets of error messages as you go through this process.
And we're back to our nurse. Oh, go on, Crystal.
And I started to say, just to add with Crystal, the 0160 is for the CSD reporting only. It's that's an object code for our classified staff. So that's where you should see that issue if you have one. Crystal, did you have more to add?
Yes, she followed up with a question that their district uses the 0130, and is that the correct or the wrong one? I just looked at the Munis chart that I use for lead purposes, and 0130 is school health coordinator. And to be in that certified role, it says that they must have any valid classroom teaching certificate or a certification for school nurse. So I guess, Tiffany, if your person that you're using that code for, if they have a valid classroom certificate or they have a school nurse EPSB issued certificate that was issued before that regulation was expired, then 0130 would be fine.
I think we've had several districts that have had that person on classified listed as 0130 as well. And I think it did, Crystal, move forward and pass through lead, fine, as you're saying. So I think that would be okay. I would have to look into if you have a school nurse that's certified. I would imagine it's the 0110, but I would need to clarify that because 0110 and 0111 are the only ones that you're going to have reporting. So I would imagine it's 0110, but I can look into that more just to be sure. I hadn't had that question before. So Crystal, thank you. And Kristen, are we good to move
Sure, my
forward?
pleasure.
Yep, you're good to go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, let's move forward on into the PSD report. And this is the PSD report, I think, is the CSD report seems to be the easier errors to check. We have a little more issue with PSD reporting, but it's basically the same thing as you follow the process. The PSD report is your professional staff data report, which produces an electronic file containing certified employee salary information to be submitted to KDE no later than October 1st, same as CSD. The PSD report uses data from the employee master file and employee job salary records for employees hired as of September 15th. And the requirements for PSD records to be created: an employee status on the employee master record must be set to active. An employee pay records must contain a valid summary class code of 0010 to 3999 and or 5000 to 5999. And employee job salary records must have a group BU of CERT or RCER. The accuracy of PSD data is essential as it is used to report to the federal government, KSBA, KEA, OEA, NCES, and state legislators. That was a mouthful, but we got through it. The salary table. So your base pay salary tables will be submitted for comparison to the actual PSD files. The tables will be used to verify each employee's base and extended day reference salary and that it corresponds to the salary tables. And salary tables must contain at least 40 steps for each grade or rank, and each table must contain the same number of steps. And the naming scheme for the salary tables must conform to KDE requirements for certified base pay. So important items to think about. We always have a lot of questions in regards to our retirees. And your retiree, if you're reporting, should fall in one of these 4 bulleted pieces of information. So if you're questioning something retiree, take a look at the slide, see where they fit. That should answer your question. So for the first bullet, we have retirees returning to work as a classified staff member, which is CLAS or RCLA, should have a summary class code that falls in the 7000 to 7999 range. Second bullet is that retired employees that retired paying into TRS return to work in the district in a classified position that requires a 4-year degree and will pay TRS are coded to that RCLA group BU. I think that's the area where I find the most problems, most needed corrections, is that you have a retired employee coming back to work in that classified position and they're using just CLA and not RCLA. So it's important to have that RCLA group BU. Third bullet is that retired employees that retired paying TRS return to work in the district in a classified position that does not require a 4-year degree and will pay CSRS are coded to CLAS group BU. So those are those 2 middle bullets are the 2 that I see or have the most issue with. So you'll want to check that closely. The last one, retired teachers hired back in a position requiring a teaching certificate will have a group BU of RCER. It should be pointed to a retired employee salary table. The rate of pay is negotiated. So this is a negotiated rate of pay involving maximum amounts set by TRS. They should pull into the PSD report. However, the grade and the step will be blank on the PSD records when they are generated. KDE does not compare the reference salary to any salary table as long as the group BU has set to RCER. So extra service pay. Certified employees who receive extra service pay must have a separate employee job salary record for each extra service job. I've seen where districts try to lump these extra service jobs into one record, and they have to have, each has to have its own extra service job record. Extra service job salary records must reflect a job class code linked to an allowable extra service summary class code, and you're going to see those in the range of 5000 to 5999. Certified employee job salary records for those employees who receive extra service pay must contain the appropriate object codes, 0112, 13, or 14. So mid-year hires working in one position. You have a partial year employee will be updated to the PSD file with a full year of days employed when the file is generated. Days employed field must stay at the number of contract days the district has set for the full year on a standard certified contract. So you want to remember the days employed must contain what the district number is for contract days for that position. The reference salary field must contain an amount reflective of a full year salary as if the employee was employed for the entire year. But here's where you're going to see the difference. The annual salary field will be the salary the employee will actually receive for the number of days he or she will work. So the reference salary is going to match what that salary table would be, you know, a full year salary. The annual salary is going to be set for if they would make $50,000 a year on the reference salary, but they're only there long enough to make $40,000. That's what you would have in the annual salary field. And here is how this is actually calculated. The FTE field needs to reflect the percentage of the standard contract days the number of days employee will work represents. So the example here is that the employee is hired after the start of the school year and will work 170 days of a 187-day contract. You divide 170 by 187 and you get 0.9091 FTE. The resulting FTE will have to be manually updated in the PSD file after it is generated if it has not been entered on the job salary record. And that FTE must be entered to the 10,000th position. As you see in the 0.9091, that is to the 10,000th position. So employees working in multiple positions. Employees who work in more than one position should have multiple job salary records. An example here is an employee is 50% high school classroom instructor and 50% media specialist. Each job salary record will be set up reflecting a portion of the total annual salary. So the note 1 here, allocation codes can also be used in conjunction with FTE when needed. Employees who perform a single job but at several locations or whose salary is being split between various GL accounts will have multiple PSD records due to the allocation code set up on the job salary record. This is just like we saw in CSD. The annual salary, reference salary, and days are prorated by the allocation percentage. So the note here, error 27 and 2720, these errors may print erroneously on employees who are working in multiple positions. Review the employee's PSD records to verify that they are set up correctly. If the records are set up as discussed, disregard the errors and no updates are necessary. You can submit with those errors. It's just going to give you those so that you can double check to make sure that they are correct. So the grade and step. The grade and step for employees having multiple job salary records should be the same. That's important. And again, with our hybrid employees, you want to verify that employees serving in a classified position but paying into TRS are set up with a group BU of CLAS and object code of 0130. These employees must be reported on the CSD file, not PSD. You're probably going to hear that 5-10 times through the rest of this presentation because it's so important. So creating the salary table file, an electronic file of the MUNIS salary tables will be created for submission to KDE. The file is submitted through the Seek Data web submission application, and in order to submit successfully to KDE, the tables must reflect the following: a naming structure that conforms to KDE standards, and the salary table file for PSD submission must contain at least 40 years of data for each grade. And all tables must contain the same number of steps. Example, if rank 1, step 1 table contains 44 steps, then all tables must contain 44 steps. So here is simply your pathway to get to your salary table file and the screen that you will see. And then you will select the electronic file button from the top of the screen and note the export file name, which you see the screenshot at the bottom, and that's what you're going to be submitting to KDE. And this is your display of your path to get to the PSD report and the screen that you will see. And resolving PSD report errors. And before we get into this, I do want to, and I think I'm going to mention this on later in the report, in the presentation, but you do need to submit your salary table file before you submit your PSD report. You can submit your CSD file at any point that you want to in whatever order, but before you submit your PSD file, your salary table file must be submitted. And I think I'm going to mention that later, but I wanted to reiterate that now. So errors that can be resolved by correcting the job class master, employee master records, and or the employee job salary records. After errors have been corrected, the recalc button can be selected to recalculate a single employee's PSD record. So multiple errors can exist due to a single problem of an employee's record. For example, an employee's record contains error 16, which is an invalid summary class code. This may also kick out error 6, which is the no base pay record, if the only base pay record for the employee is the record with an invalid summary class code. So sometimes you'll get one error, or you may get 4, but all based off one bit of information. So when you correct that one bit of information, then it's like a domino effect. It's going to correct all the other error messages that you have. So a note here is that all error tests on the KDE submission site are included in Munis. Even if there are no errors when generating the detail records in Munis, there might be other records encountered when submitting to the file to KDE, which is what we discussed earlier about your SEEK submission, that even though we get all of the Munis errors corrected, that doesn't mean that you won't get errors when you're submitting to your file to KDE. So manually updating PSD records, this is kind of the same process that we talked about with CSD. You're simply going to select Find and enter the desired criteria to find the employee and select OK. You select Update and make your changes and press Enter to save those changes. And the note here is that not all fields can be manually updated. Districts are strongly encouraged to make necessary changes in Employee Master and Employee Job Salary. So again, if you make those changes in Employee Master and Employee Job Salary and have to regenerate, that you're going to be able to keep those corrections that you have made. If you make it in just the CSD record and regenerate, they're going to go away. So manually adding PSD records, again, this is kind of the same process we talked about with CSD. You select Add, enter the information, and select OK to keep that information. And creating your electronic file. The electronic file must be created after the PSD records have been generated, reviewed, and edited. You'll find all records and select the electronic file button from the PSD report screen. After the file has been generated, the export file name will appear at the bottom of the screen. Make note of the name for use in submitting the file to KDE. And submitting the file to your PSD file to KDE. This PSD file must be submitted to KDE by October 1st. It is submitted through the SEEK Data Web Submission application. And you can refer to the document Create PSD and CSD File Submissions, which is located in the PSD and CSD Reporting section of our KDE Munis Support Guides webpage. And a note here, the salary table file, as I mentioned, must be submitted prior to submitting the PSD file. And again, with submitting a replacement file, you need to email finance.reports@education.ky.gov. They would need to reject your first one in order for you to resubmit a second file. And here is your grid for the most common PSD report errors we see. And again, we're going to talk about a few of those. Your Psd Error Code 6, which is no base pay record. The problem is that this error test checks to ensure there is a base pay record object 0110 for all employees in the PSD report. The correction here, check to make sure there is an object 0110 record for all certified employees. In other words, you can't have an 0111. You can't have these extra earnings without an 0110 base pay record. The correction here is to check to make sure there is an object code 0110 record for all certified employees. The note here is there is an exception to this error test for ESS teachers who are only teaching ESS classes. Therefore, it is allowable to have a single 0113 record coded to projects 120X or 124X, X representing the letter for the year, for an employee. Psd Error Code 650. It's an invalid object code for Psd records. This error test checks to ensure the Psd report contains valid certified expenditure object codes such as 0110, 11, 12, 13, or 14. Check to make sure the object code is a valid certified payroll object code. So error code 26, which is an accurate summary class code for object code. This error test verifies the summary class codes coordinate with valid object codes. Summary class codes are set and maintained by KDE. The range for summary class codes along with the allowable object codes are below. So you see the screenshot there. It shows you 0010 to 3999. You need to use object codes 10 or 11, and you can see on down that list. The next says below are the number ranges to be used when a district wants to add a new job class code, along with the allowable object codes for the group. So here are job class codes that you've set up within your district. So you've got 4000 to 4999, which is certified job class codes. You want to use object codes 10 and 11. 6000 to 6999, you're seeing these extra service jobs at 12, 13, and 14, and 8000 to 8999, which is classified job class codes, which is 0130, 31, and 0160. So Psd Error Code 44, no kindergarten instructor coded in the district. You have to have this. You will have an error message if you don't have a kindergarten instructor with a summary class code of 2025. I get this question every year, but we have someone, but they're not coded, they're not coded to this 2025, and they need to be. The error will state the district has no kindergarten teachers coded. So you do need a kindergarten teacher at 2025. Error code 2720. You want to check the reference salary by the FTE minus the annual salary. So this is the calculation that we looked at in CSD. This is the calculation for PSD. This error test compares the reference salary amount indicated on the PSD record to the PSD base pay, 0110 records, and multiplies it by the calculated FTE for 0110 and subtracts the product from the annual salary amount. If the difference is not within a specified range, which I again believe is plus or minus $25, you will not be allowed to submit. So you want to verify that the job salary record contains the correct reference salary for 01110 based on the district salary table submitted to KDE. Then verify that the reference salary amount listed on that file agrees to the salary table. So, that reference salary should always match your salary table. That's the first thing to check if you get something like this at the error code 2720. And this is a list of just your warnings that you can get on the report. 22 being that a media specialist is not reported for the school, summary class code 1060. Do I need to take actions? All schools are required to have at least a portion of a media specialist assigned to the building. If one person serves more than one location, break the employee's salary down by location using an allocation code on the employee's job salary record. If the position is vacant, disregard the warning. So these are all just warnings that you can look through to see what it's asking you to check for. You see the 124 here again that we saw in CSD, which says a finance officer is not reported, because again, they can be, you have finance officers that report CSD and some that report PSD. So now we're up to questions about PSD reporting. We're almost through this. It seems like it's gone by so fast. Kristen, do we have any questions any new questions at this point?
I think the one question maybe to touch on is question about effective dated pay and the impact on PSD reporting. And I know that's something that you tested with effective dated pay, with having multiple job salary records, new effective dates, and you told me it worked fine. So I don't think people have anything to worry about.
I think the only thing that we had any issue with a little bit more than normal is when some people may know what this is representing and some others, but when we went with option 1 with the payroll exceptions and they were splitting out job salary records, we had a few little FTEs that were off or allocations that were off, but we were able to fix those and the reporting went fine. So I think we're good on all that. I think we've tested about everything we can think of, and who knows, we could have if we have something come up, we'll deal with it at the time. See what happens.
Exactly, and that is it.
So any last minute questions, anybody that you want to throw out there? Or if not, you have our email address, themunis@education.ky.gov. we are here, Kristen and I are here for all things state reporting for you. If you have any questions at any time, you can always use this box, and it's really great because if Kristen's in a meeting or, one of us are out or something, the other person, can jump in and answer your questions. So even outside of PSD and CSD reporting, you can use this email, address for anything in regards to state reporting. We're always happy to help. And again, this PSD CSD reporting is something you can start now. You can run your reports and see what error messages that you get and and go ahead and correct them in job salary. So when you actually go to report them, on or after September 15th, because it's your employees up to September 15th, you may hire somebody on the 14th, who knows, but you can be doing these things now. You can get those Epsb Id numbers, in the employee master. You can run these reports and see what those errors are, and I'm ready to start. So if you run it and you say you've got an error that you don't know how to correct, go ahead and reach out to me or reach out to us at the munis at education.ky.gov, and we can start now. But the official reporting period is September 15th to October 1st. So that's all I have. Kristen or Crystal, is there anything you all want to add before we stop the webcast?
Same for me.
I think we're good. Thank you so much, Kim.
Okay. Absolutely. Everyone have a great day. And again, reach out to us if you have any questions after the webcast. Thank you.